Callum Price was just a courier with a battered bike, yet his sudden disappearance cracked open the first layer of a hidden empire that had been tightening its grip on Liverpool for years. The Shadow District had always existed in the quiet spaces of Liverpool, far from the noise of the main streets. The city changed over the decades, but the district remained hidden in plain sight, shaping the flow of secrets and silent transactions. People spoke of it carefully, as if the mere mention carried weight. It was not a territorial gang in the usual sense. It claimed no color, no slogan, and no public identity. Instead, it worked like an underground current, invisible but strong enough to pull anyone under if they drifted too close. Residents living near the northern docks noticed things that did not add up. Locked sheds appeared to shift positions overnight. Tire tracks cut through mud leading to nowhere. Certain alleyways remained spotless, even though no cleaners were ever seen. Strangers sometimes walked these streets with quiet confidence, moving as though following a pattern only they understood. They never interacted with locals, never caused disturbances, and yet their presence felt heavier than any loud or violent group. In the early years, the Shadow District kept to minor activities. Small shipments moved through abandoned warehouses, and money was exchanged in ways that avoided police attention. No one could pinpoint the beginnings of this network. Some believed it started with a group of dockworkers who once controlled smuggling routes and passed down their knowledge to a new generation. Others insisted it had foreign roots, brought in through sailors who understood the art of disappearing. Whatever the truth, the district gained a reputation for being more organized and more patient than every gang that tried to challenge it. This patience became their greatest weapon. They never confronted rivals openly. Instead, they waited and watched. When a rival gang made a mistake, the district used it to tighten its grip. When authorities cracked down on certain operations, the district quietly shifted its routes and continued as if nothing had changed. It operated with the kind of discipline that ordinary criminals rarely possessed. For this reason, people began to fear it not for what it did, but for what it might be planning. Symbols started to appear around these neighborhoods. Simple shapes carved into wooden posts, chalk marks on brick walls, scratches on metal pipes. Most people ignored them, assuming they were meaningless graffiti. But those who paid closer attention noticed patterns. A mark near a warehouse door meant the area was watched. A symbol under a street sign meant goods had recently been moved. A shape scratched into a lamppost meant the district had approved a temporary route. The symbols were not meant to be read by everyone, only by those who belonged. Taxi drivers occasionally spoke about following strange convoys of unmarked vans late at night. The vehicles moved with precision, never speeding, never stopping longer than necessary, and always heading toward the abandoned dockyards. Sometimes, the drivers claimed they saw figures unloading crates while wearing identical black gloves, as if careful not to leave fingerprints. The drivers never stayed long enough to see more. Curiosity might have been natural, but survival meant minding your own business. Over time, the Shadow District became woven into Liverpool's forgotten corners. It stayed away from the dramatic violence that defined other gangs, choosing instead to form a silent kingdom built on strategy. Outsiders struggled to understand how such a group could thrive without drawing attention. Yet for the district, invisibility was the goal. It let them move like smoke, present, but impossible to grasp. Rumors spread of secret meetings in derelict buildings, where decisions were made about routes, alliances, and punishments. No one claimed to know the leader, though some spoke of a figure who acted more like a strategist than a criminal. Whoever ran the district seemed determined to build something lasting, something that couldn't be crushed by arrests or rival attacks. And as the years went by, their influence deepened, reaching into places no one expected. Liverpool carried many legends, but none unsettled the city more than the thought of a gang that operated without noise, ego, or weakness. The Shadow District became less of a rumor and more of a quiet truth, shaping the landscape from beneath the surface. And although most people tried to ignore it, everyone sensed that something was shifting. The district was no longer content with the shadows. It was preparing to step further into the city, and no one knew what its next move would be. The disappearance on Ashfield Road began as a small ripple, the kind that usually faded before anyone noticed. Courier vanished from time to time in Liverpool's criminal world, but this case carried a different weight. The first courier was a young man who had spent years running errands between small gangs, never sticking with one group long enough to make enemies. He lived quietly, kept his head down, and blended into the background. That was why his absence felt strange. People like him did not simply disappear without leaving a trace. When he failed to show up for a scheduled pickup, the gang he worked for assumed he had overslept or lost track of time. By the next day, concern turned into suspicion, and by the third day, fear spread through the people who relied on him. His flat on Ashfield Road looked untouched. The door was locked, the bed neatly made, and there were no signs of a struggle. What puzzled investigators was a torn piece of paper found under his kitchen table. It had a single marking carved into it, the same shape rumored to belong to the Shadow District. The symbol had appeared before around Liverpool, but never inside the home of someone who vanished. That small piece of paper changed the entire tone of the investigation. What had once looked like an isolated disappearance now felt like the opening move of a larger plan. Before anyone could fully grasp what had happened, another courier disappeared. This second man had been transporting small cash bundles between two rival groups. He was tough, experienced, and knew how to avoid traps. His motorbike was found parked neatly beside a brick wall near the river, as if he had stopped on purpose. The key was still in the ignition. His helmet lay on the ground, scratched but not broken. Nothing suggested a fight. It was as though he had set his belongings down and walked off into the night without a reason. People who lived near the riverfront later reported hearing a faint metallic sound echoing from the old tunnel system underneath the docks. Most assumed it was just the wind moving through the abandoned passages, but after the disappearance, those sounds took on a new meaning. The tunnels had been sealed years earlier, at least officially. If someone had reopened them, it would explain how the couriers vanished without being seen. The third disappearance confirmed the rising panic. This courier handled more sensitive tasks, moving stolen electronics through routes designed to avoid police patrols. He was last spotted riding his bicycle near the disused rail yard. A street camera captured him turning down a narrow service road, and then the footage ended because the camera froze for 7 full minutes. When it resumed, the road was empty. Authorities tried to blame the glitch on old equipment, but the timing was too precise to ignore. Someone had interfered with the camera and removed the courier during the blackout. Gangs across Liverpool reacted with growing paranoia. Meetings halted. Deals were postponed. People who had once traveled freely now watched every shadow. The disappearances felt less like random attacks and more like carefully selected pieces being removed from a board. Each courier had traveled through different territories, yet all had connections to the same forgotten parts of the city, the abandoned tunnels beneath the docks. Whispers began circulating about a hidden operation taking shape underground. Some believed the Shadow District was preparing for a major takeover, using the couriers as warnings. Others suggested the couriers had discovered something they were never meant to see. Theories multiplied, but no one had proof. The tunnels had always been a point of unease, a place where sound traveled too far and light never lasted. What frightened people most was the possibility that the Shadow District had grown bolder. They had spent years remaining silent, but these disappearances carried a message. They were making moves, and they were doing it without leaving evidence behind. Liverpool's criminal world suddenly felt smaller, darker, and far more dangerous. Whatever the Shadow District was planning, the city sensed it was only beginning. The warehouse near the Mersey had long been a landmark of neglect, a rusted frame standing against the wind like a monument to forgotten industry. Locals passed it without a second glance, assuming it was just another abandoned building left over from Liverpool's busier dock days. Yet something about it always felt slightly wrong. The windows remained strangely clean despite years of disuse, and the heavy sliding door showed no signs of corrosion. Some nights, faint vibrations could be felt in the pavement nearby, as though machinery deep within the building was humming to life. But no one ever saw workers entering or leaving, and curiosity had a way of turning into caution in this part of the city. When authorities finally breached the warehouse after the string of disappearances, they expected to find little more than dust and old crates. Instead, they stepped into a world built with purpose. The structure had been transformed from the inside into a nerve center unlike anything the city had encountered. The ground floor was divided into rooms separated by metal partitions that did not match the building's age. Each room served as a station. One held printing equipment capable of producing counterfeit documents with near-perfect accuracy. Another stored electronic devices, still in their boxes, labeled with foreign shipping codes. Scattered across tables were ledger books containing symbols, dates and numbers arranged in a system too organized to belong to a typical criminal group. It became clear that the warehouse had not been abandoned at all. It had been repurposed, reinvented into a base of operations that operated below every radar. The deeper investigators explored, the more meticulous everything appeared. Shelves held supplies arranged by size and color. Crates were stacked with exact spacing between them. Even the dust seemed swept into neat lines along the walls, revealing a level of discipline that felt unsettling. It suggested that whoever worked here followed rules. Strict rules that demanded precision and silence. But the most disturbing discovery waited at the back of the warehouse. A large wall had been transformed into a map of Liverpool. It stretched floor to ceiling, marked with hundreds of small colored pins and symbols. Each symbol matched the ones found scattered across the city. The same chalk marks on brick, the same carved shapes on wood, the same patterns noticed near the tunnels. These markings were not random graffiti, they were the coded language of the Shadow District, now revealed in a single overwhelming display. Every alleyway, every hidden route, every vulnerable point in rival territories had been mapped. The Shadow District had been studying the city for years, watching from the dark corners no one noticed. Behind this map was a locked metal door that resisted every attempt to force it open. When it finally gave way, investigators found a narrow corridor lit only by flickering bulbs. The walls were lined with files where the couriers had vanished. The connection was no longer speculation. The warehouse was not just a headquarters, it was an entry point into the underground world the Shadow District controlled. Reports later described the tunnels as winding and disorienting, filled with echoes that made it impossible to tell where sounds originated. Pathways branched off in unpredictable directions, some leading to collapsed walls, others to makeshift workstations, lit by hanging lamps. It was a labyrinth built over time, shaped to serve whoever ruled it, and based on the evidence above ground, that ruler had been planning something vast. The discovery of the warehouse changed everything. The Shadow District was no longer an invisible rumor. It was a torture, deliberate force that had woven itself beneath Liverpool's surface like roots spreading through soil. The disappearances, the symbols, the fear, they were not isolated incidents. They were pieces of a system slowly revealing itself, one hidden room at a time. The investigation into the tunnels led to an unexpected series of connections that forced authorities to rethink everything they believed about the Shadow District. What began as a search for missing couriers gradually shifted into the unraveling of a sophisticated network that reached far beyond underground passages or abandoned warehouses. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became that the district's power did not grow from violence or numbers. It grew from influence, crafted with patience and disguised beneath a layer of trust that no one had ever questioned. The breakthrough came when analysts followed a trail of financial transactions linked to the tunnels. At first glance, the transactions looked harmless. Donations to community centers, funding for youth programs, contributions to neighborhood cleanup efforts. But the amounts did not match the reported sources, and the timing of each payment aligned suspiciously with major movements within the Shadow District. These were not the actions of a criminal gang attempting to hide money. They were signs of someone building a polished public identity while managing operations out of sight. All signs pointed toward a single individual, a community organizer known throughout Liverpool as a dedicated figure committed to reducing crime and improving living conditions in struggling neighborhoods. This person was regularly seen at charity events, public meetings, and local vigils. They were respected by politicians, praised by activists, and trusted by residents who believed they were fighting for positive change. For years, no one had reason to question their intentions. Their reputation was spotless, their influence widespread, and their presence constant. Many considered them the voice of the people. But the evidence found beneath Liverpool painted a very different picture. Investigators discovered coded documents hidden inside the tunnels that matched those kept inside the organizer's office. The markings were identical, the same symbols used by the Shadow District to communicate routes and operations. Ledger entries matched charity deposits. Even the layout of the underground routes aligned with the organizer's known travel patterns. The coincidence was too precise. The organizer had access, knowledge, and opportunity. More importantly, they had built a perfect disguise, one that allowed them to move freely between public admiration and hidden control. The files stored in the tunnel cabinets revealed a strategy that had been unfolding for years. Notes detailed rival gang disputes, each following a timeline that suggested manipulation rather than coincidence. Where gangs believed their conflicts were rooted in betrayal or territorial clashes, the documents showed they had been nudged toward those confrontations by subtle acts, misleading messages, rerouted deliveries, planted rumors. The organizer had been guiding these groups like pieces on a board, ensuring they weakened one another while the Shadow District quietly expanded beneath the chaos. What shocked investigators most was the ambition behind the plan. The goal was not wealth or notoriety, it was order. A controlled, predictable criminal landscape where no gang grew too powerful and no unexpected threat could disrupt the organizer's vision. The tunnels served as arteries feeding this system, and the warehouse operated as its brain. Everything was engineered to create stability in the shadows while allowing the organizer to shine publicly as a champion of safety. As the truth came into focus, a chilling pattern emerged. Every public speech about reducing violence matched a moment where the Shadow District tightened its hold. Every call for unity coincided with a disruption in a rival gang's network. The organizer's entire public identity had been carefully constructed to shield the operation below. They were not just connected to the Shadow District, they were its architect. Yet capturing such a figure required caution. The organizer knew the city intimately, understood its blind spots, and anticipated the reactions of both criminals and authorities. The investigators realized they were dealing with someone who always planned ahead, someone who had spent years studying behavior, movement, and opportunity. Approaching too quickly risked losing the only chance to expose the truth. Liverpool had seen dangerous criminals before, but none with such a calculated approach. The organizer had managed to sit at the heart of both community improvement and underground control, merging two worlds that were never meant to touch. And now, as investigators closed in, the city braced for a confrontation unlike anything it had faced. Because the mastermind behind the Shadow District had built a world where every shadow served a purpose, and every move had already been anticipated. The plan to apprehend the organizer unfolded slowly, shaped by careful strategy and countless late-night meetings between investigators who understood the danger of confronting someone who always thought several steps ahead. Every move had to be precise. The tunnels were still unstable, the warehouse was under surveillance, and the organizer continued to make public appearances, smiling beside local leaders who had no idea of the truth hidden beneath their city. The investigators coordinated quietly, gathering what remained of the evidence before making their final approach. But before any action could be taken, the ground beneath Liverpool erupted in a sudden, violent tremor. The explosion came from deep within the tunnel network. Streets near the docks shook as though struck by a distant earthquake, and smoke poured through old drainage grates. Witnesses reported a deep, muffled roar, followed by a rush of air that sent dust into the night sky. Emergency services rushed to the scene, but the unease in the air suggested that this was not an accident. Someone had triggered a controlled demolition with extraordinary precision, targeting the areas of the tunnels that held the most incriminating evidence. What remained was buried beneath twisted metal, collapsed walls, and a layer of debris impossible to sift through quickly. Years of hidden activity were wiped out in seconds. The timing was too perfect to ignore. The organizer disappeared on the same night, vanishing from both public sight and private reach. Their car was left parked near a community center where they had been scheduled to meet with volunteers. No signs of struggle were found. No belongings were missing. It was as if they had stepped into the darkness and dissolved into it. Investigators searched their home, office, and known meeting places, but everything inside was meticulously cleared. Hard drives were wiped, documents removed, and compartments empty. The organizer had planned every detail, leaving behind nothing but a hollow shell of the identity they had so carefully built. Rumors began filling the city like smoke from the explosion. Some claimed the organizer had fled overseas, using a hidden network of contacts to escape undetected. Others believed they were still in Liverpool, hiding in plain sight under a new identity, crafted with the same precision used to build the Shadow District. More unsettling theories suggested they had not escaped alone. The demolition of the tunnels was too large for one person to execute, implying the presence of partners who were either loyal to the vision or afraid of the consequences of betrayal. Whoever helped them had vanished as well. In the weeks following the collapse, the criminal world in Liverpool shifted uneasily. The Shadow District no longer had a clear form, yet its influence lingered like an echo. The symbols that once appeared as coded markers continued to show up unexpectedly. Some were fresh, drawn with careful strokes. Others were repainted over older marks, as if someone was maintaining them. This raised unsettling questions. If the mastermind was gone, who was keeping the network alive? Was a new leader emerging? Or had the organizer orchestrated the illusion of disappearance to mask continued control from a deeper shadow? Fear spread quietly among gangs who had once believed themselves untouchable. Deals were cancelled, routes abandoned, and alliances dissolved as leaders questioned who might be watching them. Without knowing whether the Shadow District had truly fallen, no one dared make bold moves. A strange form of peace settled across the city, not driven by cooperation, but by hesitation. For the public, the explosion and the organizer's disappearance remained an unsolved mystery, softened by official statements that offered reassurances without revealing the truth. The authorities could not admit how deeply the district had infiltrated the city, nor how close its architect had come to reshaping Liverpool's criminal landscape entirely. But those involved in the investigation understood the gravity of what had slipped through their fingers. The mastermind had built a world underground, controlled it with perfect discipline, and vanished before anyone could uncover the full extent of the plan. Liverpool returned to its routines, but the sense of something unfinished lingered. People avoided old alleys, glanced twice at unfamiliar markings, and listened for distant sounds beneath the pavement. No one knew whether the district was finished or simply evolving. The silence that followed felt less like an ending and more like a pause, a moment of calm before the city learned what grew in the shadows that remained untouched, waiting for the next move that no one would see coming.